Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening. Today, I am speaking with Sadia Hameed. Sadia is a spokesperson for the Councils of Ex-Muslims of Britain, and she also used to work quite a bit in the women's sector in the UK. Hi, Sadia. Thank you for coming on.
Hi, thank you for having me.
If you want to, if you don't mind, just giving people a little bit of a background about you. Like the first time I became aware of you is when I saw that movie by Dia Khan,
Yeah.
Britain's Ex-Muslims. I believe that was the one.
The film was called Islam's Non-Believers,
Okay. Yeah.
and that's what kind of ended up thrusting me um, into this movement, really, I guess. But before that, for about a decade, I'd been working in the women's sector, specifically around domestic abuse and sexual violence. So that's my specialist area, and I focus on. I specialize in harmful traditional practices, so things like honor-based violence, forced marriage, FGM, and the list is, quite long. Obviously, there's like breast ironing, dowry-related abuse, sex selective abortion, things like that. So that was my specialist background. Um, and then I ended up becoming quite involved in the atheist and secularist movement um, after my brother. Um, and yeah, that kind of thrusted me more into, the public arena. Um, but it was an easy transition as well because so many ex-Muslims, so many atheists face harmful traditional practices in the UK, for instance. The two things that ex-Muslims are most likely to face are honor-based violence or forced marriage. We see that time and time again. Or being completely disowned by family. So, it was quite an easy shift to the atheist movement, specifically for, ex-Muslims and atheists of color, I guess. Um, the difficulty that I've experienced, though, when I was doing this work and I wasn't joined to the atheist movement, it felt just a tiny bit easier. I mean, it was always hard in some senses because there was a different standard for women of color than there was for, white women. So when we talked about domestic abuse and sexual violence, we'd finally got to a place where everybody could unanimously say, these things are wrong. Yes, we'll just sit and nod and, it's easy. But when we were talking about the issues that women of color faced, there were always conversations about religion and race and accusations of racism and accusations of bigotry for questioning these experiences that these women were having, which made me quite sorry, am I allowed to swear?
Oh, feel free.
Yeah, it fucked me up actually because they, we're still focusing on the sensibilities of the perpetrators than the experiences of the victims, and we've seen that time and again in Britain. So, for honour crimes and forced marriage, whenever we talk about those issues, somebody will bring up racism or Islamophobia and fear of harming sensibilities. There's never that conversation. We never talk about when we're talking about domestic abuse or sexual violence, nobody says, well, not all men are rapists. That's quite an old saying. They don't need to caveat it with that anymore. We have to caveat it every time we have a discussion about harmful traditional practices. We have to caveat it with not all brown people, not all Muslims, as if there's a suggestion just because we're talking about these issues that we're claiming that everybody from that community is a perpetrator. I find that quite offensive. That they think that just because I'm talking about the issues that affect me, that I'm also, promoting some kind of bigotry towards my community. And I'm fed up. I'm sick to the back teeth of adding these caveats and wasting my fucking time. When actually, for me, what's more important is the experiences of the victims than the identity and the potential backlash that perpetrators are going to experience. Um, if you don't have to add that caveat when you're talking about domestic abuse and sexual violence, why do we have to do it when we're talking about our issues? And then worse still, it's even worse when you have this element of apostasy, or atheism, or any of the kind of people that I work with now. There's this vulgar there's this vulgar kind of assumption that they ask for it, that atheists and apostates from Islam, just by choosing not to believe, are more deserving of honor crimes and forced marriage. So I got into this sector, the women's sector, for two reasons. One, for because of my own personal experiences, but two, because of the murder of Banaz Mahmood, and the fact that she had nobody. So that was what thrusted me into this sector, because I felt the injustices that she had experienced, they sat in my stomach like, it just sat at the back of my mouth like a bad taste for a very, very long time. And the institutions that worked with Banaz are still failing people, still failing women, still failing minorities. That hasn't changed. Some of the smaller institutions around the country are doing a bit better, because they don't have the excuse of, well, we're constantly on off our feet. But the Metropolitan Police, as an example, are still a very, very poor and shoddy institution. They constantly give us the excuse, we haven't got enough money, we haven't got enough officers, we haven't got the understanding. Well, fucking learn then. Why is that excuse being given to us when it's women of colour, but when you're dealing with domestic abuse and sexual violence, with it's just easier? You're not facing the backlash. The only other community that we saw this level of failure of the victims was the child sexual exploitation cases that we saw in Britain. So by that I mean the grooming gangs, the Muslim Pakistani men and Bangladeshi Muslim men in Britain that were exploiting, raping, sharing amongst themselves white working class girls. That was the only other case when we saw a complete failure of the victims for fear of not upsetting the perpetrators and the community of the perpetrators. So that's, in our case and in their case, it was the victims that were being let down. And I'm not for a moment saying that all ex-Muslims are victims, but what I'm saying is our experiences aren't taken seriously.
Yeah, I mean, okay, you brought up a lot of stuff there. It's not nearly as bad in Canada and the United States as reports I see coming out of the UK and Europe. But we have had cases here where it was last year, it was an Afghani refugee who was let off with a very light sentence for raping a woman, and it was because, well, he doesn't really know our customs.
Well, that's ridiculous. I'm sorry.
It is. It's and I see this as a failure of our governments. I mean, I know you're talking about the institutions in the UK, and it's a failure of the institutions. It's a failure of the government. And I keep bringing this up. When my family emigrated to Canada at the end of '75, my parents, the government had courses where you could go learn about laws, and we're an open society, but they actually took the time to teach new immigrants these things, so the immigrants knew what was kind of expected of them. Like, okay, here are your freedoms, but here are also your obligations.
Yeah.
Okay.
The interesting thing is, so Britain has something called a Life in the UK test, which is what you have to be able to pass to get British citizenship or settlement in the UK. Now, I've seen the questions that they ask. They don't ask anything about the laws. They don't ask, they don't ask useful questions. But we must also remember that this is a shitty excuse that these perpetrators have, because no matter what country in the world you're in, perpetrators know there's some basic things that humans know, right? That you shouldn't be raping people, you shouldn't be murdering people. Those things are very, very basic. To let somebody off for that, because we had a case like that in the UK. There was a case in 2003, I think it was, Heshi Yunus. Her dad slit her throat in his bathroom, in their bathroom, and killed her. And the judge made religious and cultural leniencies during her sentencing. It took so long, nearly a decade, to have that leniency overturned, because what that sends quite a strong message that our lives, the lives of women of colour, are worth less than that of a white British woman. Then we went full circle in their bigotry and in their double standards. Then a few years later, we have two girls that were sexually assaulted, two Pakistani British Muslim girls that were raped. And during the sentencing, the judge said, because of the double shame that these women are going to experience, this perpetrator is going to get a heavier sentence, which then says to white women in this country that when you're raped, it's not as serious. Like, the message that they're sending to others in society is that you're either more or less important. And actually, one thing that the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain does is advocate for equality. We want everybody to be treated as equals, and that doesn't mean that we're not taking into account their differences. It just means that in terms of the law and education and social services, everybody is treated equally, and no one group of people or persons is given priority or special treatment, because then what that does is it pisses off another group in society. So if one group is being favoured, then other groups are going to feel like, well, why are they getting special treatment and we're being left behind? And that causes, we're already a very, very divided country, but divisions are deepened by that kind of behaviour, that kind of thinking, that kind of double standard, essentially.
Yeah, and okay, the double standards. One thing, like you brought it up, it's so if I have a friend who talks about going to the police when she was younger because she was being beaten by her parents, and because she was brown, and it's like, oh well, that's just something that happens in your culture, and it was kind of brushed aside.
That.
But I mean, it takes a lot for a teenager to go to the police to bring this up about their parents, right? And so they're, just because you're brown, it's I agree with you that, like, we have laws where everyone's supposed to be equal under the law, but it's it's cliche and everyone says it, but I mean, it is Orwellian. It's some are more equal than others, or
exactly. We do know that the law of this country, and I think many countries actually, it could be said, is created for not only a certain race but also a certain class of people. So middle class people, white middle class people in this country are going to be treated very, very differently to somebody who's working class, is a bit rough and ready. And like I said, I used to work in sexual violence, so I know some of the different interaction that you would have with people from different class backgrounds, even to the way that you talk. And because I used to work in sexual violence, I mean, part of our job was to ensure that victims of rape were treated fairly, and some would be better at it and others wouldn't be so good at it. So of course sometimes it depends on the police officer. I guess I'm having to throw one of those caveats in that I hate having to do that, not all police officers, and it does piss me off I have to do that, but the fact remains that there are some very, very bad apples within these institutions that treat people differently. But also something else has been happening in this country, and I've experienced it personally, that there are individuals that have a vested interest in ensuring that these crimes can carry on being perpetrated against women and vulnerable people within our community. So they place themselves in positions of power. And I'll give you an example of this. And there's countless examples of this, but I can give you one that's a very personal experience. So in my county, I deliver training around harmful traditional practices. And I have been doing for half a decade now. And I was asked to deliver this training with an experienced social worker who'd been practicing at that time in the county for 23 years. She was a Gujarati Muslim social worker. And she delivered 1.5 day of training with me, and after that she was told to kindly fuck off and never come back. Because after that half day of training, she told me, so she's from the local Gujarati Muslim community. Her manager is from the local Gujarati Muslim community, and a victim of domestic violence that she was supporting was from the local Gujarati Muslim community, and her husband, who was beating her. She had to place this victim in a refuge because the abuse was so bad, and she had to get her safe. Her husband then approached the manager of this social worker and said, "I want my fucking wife back, mate." This manager approaches this social worker and says, "Well, the husband's come to me and said this, you make it happen." And essentially they were reunited. Now, that victim is never ever going to trust any institute ever again because of the failure, and quite a grave failure, at the hands of this social worker. Now, I don't know if she's still alive. Who knows? How would I know, right? But there's this huge failure that's happened and is happening across the country in Britain. There's a video of an ITV video of a policewoman where, from the London Metropolitan Police Service, they had set up this unit within the police to give theological advice to people coming to their service, which isn't their job. I'm not very happy about my tax money going towards providing theological advice when they're a public service, and their job is to protect and safeguard the community and nothing more. So this unit was set up, and because this woman was challenging some of the practices that she was seeing, some of the ideas that they were supposed to be tackling, she was told that FGM is a clean and honourable practice, and that she should get down on her knees and beg for forgiveness for being not a good Muslim. And this video came out, I think, in 2016, so 3 years ago. So we know, and she's now lost her job, by the way, because she tried to complain and take it further, and it didn't go any further. So she was essentially bullied out of her job, because if that police officer dealing with her was even one rank higher, I mean, the police is one of the oldest old boys clubs in the country. They close ranks very, very quickly. They would safeguard the senior police officers more so than the junior police officers. And she'd actually rose to the rank of sergeant before having to leave the police. So obviously her track record was good enough to get her to rise to the rank of sergeant. But the point is, I've personally seen, both in my personal professional experience and through my activism up and down the country, through lots and lots of resources and lots of video evidence and lots of interactions that I've had with people, there are people that have a vested interest in safeguarding these harmful traditional practices within our communities and safeguarding the perpetrators, not the victims.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things on that. One, So I did a lot of work overseas. I worked with the military, but then the last few years I've been up in northern Canada, and the Inuit communities up there, I mean, there's so many problems that you can't even begin to list them all. But I see that a lot. There's people that come up out of, I'll call it misplaced altruism. They want to do good, but at the same time, they perpetuate, that these people are continuously victims, and they always need help, so that there's always, they're always there to help them. So they're kind of, I don't want to be that cynical, but it's almost like it's job protection. Yeah. And then another thing I see is this: we don't want to seem racist, so we'll err on the side of injustice just so we don't seem like we're not, just so we don't look racist. And that's
self-protection, isn't it? And if that's why you're doing that job, then don't fucking do it, because this is exactly what I had to say to the social worker. While she was telling me this horrific story of reuniting perpetrator with victim, she was also sat there telling me, well, I have to keep my family safe. And I thought, if you can't keep your family safe whilst doing your job, jack your job in and go and work in fucking Asda. Don't work in, so her job was adult social care, so safeguarding vulnerable adults. If you can't keep those that are in your care safe, don't do the job. Fuck off and do a job that pays your bills, but don't do something where you're ruining people's lives and throwing victims back in front of the bus that they were trying to jump out of the way of. That is, and I'm always suspicious of these individuals, and I guess I have become very, very cynical now because the evidence has pushed me into that, not because, and I wasn't always this cynical. I came into this sector feeling like, well, these agencies have been set up to safeguard these people, and they're going to, regardless of my personal experiences, like your friend, were really, really negative with these institutions. But I was hoping that they had learnt enough since when these things were happening to me, till when I started, practicing as a professional. The reality is they've got worse. They've actually got a lot worse. And these people that have this interest in safeguarding these practices have become louder and more powerful within these institutions. And then there's voices like mine that have been trying to safeguard the victims, truly safeguard the victims, that are being viewed and treated as troublemakers because they're getting in the way of the people that have this vested interest in safeguarding the perpetrators. My problem is that so I've attended several meetings around these kinds of things, and these individuals turn up and they will filibuster, they will derail conversation, they will intentionally not allow us to do the work. They will create obstacles. I mean, I've held events where people have turned up and said, this has got nothing to do with Islam, and the conversation of Islam hasn't even been touched upon in a 2-hour event, because what they're trying to do is create this atmosphere of fear. And I have to remind you, every single honour killing that we've had in this country, perpetrators, often the family members of the victims that have killed the victims, will cry Islamophobia, they will cry racism every single time. That's
no, I mean, it's just giving that excuse, and they, unfortunately, these people that, like I said, maybe I still give them a little bit of benefit of the doubt. Like I said, misplaced altruism. At one point, I was saying it was benevolent bigotry, and it's but you're giving people an out. You're giving people an excuse to say this. I just want to slightly shift a little bit, but it's kind of on the same tack, because I know. Okay, last year. Was it last year at the Pride Parade where the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain got in trouble because of the Allah's gay flag, or was it the year before?
It was the year before, yeah.
And then this year, like with the stuff that's going on in Birmingham, and they're capitulating. It's like, okay, well, these people are brown, so do they have more rights than these people who are only homosexual and they're not brown? Like, I don't understand, like, how, like, where is this calculus coming from? Like, how do you figure out this oppression calculus? Like, who do you protect?
This is again the double standard, right? Because if you are a white atheist, if you're I guess an ex-Christian, so to speak, you're never gonna face any criticism for criticizing, mocking, lampooning Christianity. I've never seen that same backlash. The death threats, the rape threats, the abusive messages that we persistently get as an organization. I never see that. But for ex-Muslims, there's this accusation instantly that's thrown in our face, and it's just this double standard. Why is one set of ideas perfectly okay and acceptable to criticize, but Islam is not? But it's exactly that there's been a huge effort in this country to liken Islam and Muslims to a race, when actually Islam itself claims to be a universal religion that attracts everybody from all racial backgrounds. I mean, I feel like this has been said so many times that I actually get bored of saying this now, that it's not a race. And if you still think that it's a race, you're a fucking moron.
No, but it's true. I mean, okay, the whole Islam is a race thing. And then, I mean, I keep hearing Muslim culture. And it's okay, and again, this is a point I've tried to drive home, and a mutual friend of ours, Yasmin Mohammed, she said the same thing. It's like, a Catholic living in the Philippines and a Catholic living in Argentina, they don't have, they share Catholicism in common, but they don't share a culture. They don't, it's the same thing. I mean, Muslims in Pakistan and Muslims in Tunisia
Yeah.
share a belief system, obviously, dietary restrictions, all that, but it's not the same culture.
But actually, something's been happening because when I was younger, so I'm going to be 33 in a couple of months. When I was younger, there was no such thing as Muslim culture. It was Pakistani culture. It was Indian culture. And actually, I remember because I'm very aware that Pakistanis are very, very bigoted and very, very racist. So my family used to say to me things like, their Hindu culture, we can't practice some of their Hindu practices, that's gonna stray you away from your religion. But they were very proud of their Pakistani culture. And actually I feel a deep loss now because I quite like some of the cultural things that I grew up with, not the religious, but some of the cultural things. I love the food. I love Pakistani music, and it's very different to Bollywood or Indian music. I love Pakistani music so very much, like some of the old classics, Noor Jahan and I've forgotten her name now. It'll come to me. But there's lots and like Gavali and stuff, and Nusrat Ali Khan and all of those fantastic singers. I love Pakistani culture, but Pakistani culture has been erased, and what's been put in its place. And I think me and Yasmin had a bit of a disagreement about this when we did our last podcast. I do think this is Arab imperialism, and you can see it, this erasure of every culture that Arab Islam touches. So this is something that the Saudis are doing very much so, and we're quite quick. The West is quite quick to critique and apologize for, Western imperialism and colonialism. However, right now what we're seeing is Arab imperialism, and it's erasing everything it touches. There's this fantastic meme online that you can see where they look at the clothing of women from, a dozen or so Muslim countries, what it used to look like 10 years ago and what they now look like. 10 years ago, you could see the different outfits and they were stunning. They looked so beautiful. Now, the women are all dressed in black. Their faces covered. You can barely see their eyes. The slits of their niqab measured. So this is Arab imperialism and the erosion of our culture and our, the things, our rich history that we used to have.
Oh yeah, no, okay. I'm a little bit older. Well, more than a little bit older than you. I'm going to be 50 this year. And the same thing. Like I was born in India. My mom grew up in Karachi. My family moved to Canada when I was 6. And I would go back to India and I would see it. And then one thing I noticed in the late 80s, and that was here. Some cousins or something like that came from India or like distant relations. And okay, the Urdu word Khudafiz, right? Just God be with you, basically. So I said that to them, and one of them turned around and said, no, now we say Allah Fiz. And I was like, what is this thing, Allah Fiz? Oh, well, because, Khuda is not the Arabic word for God. I'm like, so? And it was, same thing, okay, something simple as well was Ramzan. Before that, my parents would say Ramzan, I'd always hear Ramzan, and that was the Urdu way.
Yeah. I still say it, yeah, exactly.
And now it's Ramadan because that's more Arabic sounding. One little thing like the Arabization. I know what you're saying, and I use the term myself, but I think what Yasmin was trying to get at, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, and I don't want to, it's a small thing, but I think what she was getting at was that Arabs themselves, when Islam started, Arabs were the first people to lose their individual cultures.
Oh, of course.
Yeah,
I completely.
And so now it is Arabs. It is Arab states pushing this out. Mainly Saudi, but you also have Qatar and Kuwait putting money towards this. It is Arab, and it's the language, and it is, but it's now what started out as local Qurayshi culture, if you want to call it that, because it was the Quraysh tribe, right? That spread out and covered the entire Arabian Peninsula. That is now being commonly called Arab culture. But if you go back 1400 years, like I said, I get where everyone's coming from, but I think that's what Yasmin was trying to get at was Arabs lost
Yeah,
their culture first, and that
completely
was
understand. I completely understand that, but I think also this term is really, really important, and I'll tell you why. So, two things. In terms of when we're talking about Western imperialism, like we know fully, completely that, when we're talking about it, we're not talking about poor people from the West. Most Westerners are against Western foreign policy, but we still call it Western foreign policy. This is why I use the term Arabization, because those influential, powerful people from these Arab nations are influencing the world and shifting the they're changing the whole of the Muslim world, and even the non-Muslim world, even in the UK, for crying out loud. When I was a kid, we used to call it the Quran. Now people call it the Quran. Like they have
sorry.
this. It's ridiculous. I hate it. Every time I hear somebody talking like a fucking Arab and they're not fucking Arab, I'm like, why are you talking like that? If I find it really offensive. So they're taking over language, food, clothes, everything. This is Arab imperialism, and that's why I kind of use the term Arabization intentionally. I know people find it controversial, and I think it, but I still think it's an important one because of it doesn't mean all of a sudden that I'm saying that all Arabs, but I am saying that this is a Arab force that's kind of influencing the whole of the world, and I still feel very stubborn about that, I guess.
Oh no, no. I mean, look, I'm not gonna argue too much against that. It's just I think I was just trying to frame what Yasmin had said based on how I understood it, and so I know I get where you're coming from. Okay, even myself, like my family, from my dad's side, come from Yemen, right? So, but it was 5 generations in India, so but I see my family, and when they recite the Quran, or when they, there's some of them that have say Mashallah and Bismillah every second word. But then, like I've met some of my dad's family from who live in the Middle East who are native Arab speakers, and when I hear them pronounce, recite the Quran or say anything, as opposed to my family in India who don't speak Arabic, who don't understand it, but they put on these airs, and it sounds so forced and so wrong. And then the Arab speaking ones sometimes would look at them like, what are you doing? That's not, and it's, I don't know why. This is going to be a little bit off tangent. It reminds me of this friend of mine growing up. He was Gujarati. My family is from Hyderabad. And when, we spoke amongst ourselves or with other friends, there was, he spoke like I am right now, without any hint of any accent or anything like that. Well, I guess to you I seem like I have an accent, but we spoke like Canadians. But when he talked to his parents, he sounded like Apu. It was hilarious. and he didn't notice it. Like, we would point it out to him. He's like, no, I don't. And he's like, no, yeah, you do. And he's like, and he didn't notice that he was switching into this accent when he was talking to his parents, but when he was talking to us, he wasn't.
That's so true. Do I'm thinking back, and I'm pretty certain when I speak to my grandparents, because I don't do it with my parents, the few interactions that I do have, because I don't speak to my parents very often, but when I haven't spoken to my grandparents for over a decade now, but when I used to speak to my grandparents, and they're both alive still, I do the same. Like, it was this Punjabi accent that would be placed on top of my normal English language, and I have no idea why. But I think it's different. I think in that sense it's different. I think with the Arab accent that a lot of Muslims are adopting now, I think it is very forced, because I when I was doing it with my grandparents, it wasn't a conscious thing. I knew my grandparents talked English in a certain way, and it was just the way we interacted as a close-knit family. Like, it naturally just kind of came out like that. And I think it's very different to when it's forced. And I think with the Muslim community now, there's been this huge attempt to, get closer to Arab Islam and Wahhabi Islam, that they are forcing these this Arabian accent whenever they're talking, whenever they're using any Arab word, and it just makes me cringe. I find it leaves a really like icky taste in my mouth. I don't understand why they're doing it, really.
Well, okay, I don't know when the last time you were back to either Pakistan or India, but like I was just in India last year, and I go back every few years. I have family there, and I like visiting. But I this love-hate relationship with the Arabs.
Yeah.
Oh, the Arabs are the most pious, the greatest, blah blah blah. And then they turn around. Like my cousin was working there. He was doing refrigeration repair, and oh, he's got a job in Saudi Arabia. He's so it's amazing. He's so close to Mecca. All this, and then he would come back and he's like, "Oh, I hate them. They're awful. They treat me badly." And then as soon as religion comes up, they're the Arabs are the best thing since sliced bread.
Yeah.
It's so bizarre in South Asia.
It's the same in Pakistan. So, I mean, I haven't been back for a long time, but I still hear quite a lot of the stories and stuff. It's exactly the same. And, my mum's dad left before my mum was married. My mum was married at 15. He left long, long before she was married to go to Saudi and work in Saudi. And there's lots of my family members I know that are now living in Saudi, working and sending money back, and they think it's a fantastic thing. They do also talk about how the fact they're not allowed to own property, own anything essentially. You have to rent it from an Arab, but also yes, there is this kind of, I guess, fetishization of the fact that they're like close to Makkah. I don't really know why it's. Well, I do know, if you've grown up Muslim, I guess you do understand why they're so excited about being close to it, really. I mean, I remember because I went to Umrah with my grandparents, which is like the mini pilgrimage. But like, it's hyped up so much. I was told that if I die out there, I'll be going straight to heaven. So I remember, because I was 19 then, I remember hoping to die out there because I thought I'd be absolved of all my sins. So it's hyped up a hell of a lot in South Asia, particularly. But also, I did have my ass pinched out there. I did have my boob groped out there whilst I was walking around the Kaaba, and I remember kicking off, and everybody attacked me. Everybody doing the tawaf stopped and started shouting bidda bidda to me, rather than anything to the guy that had groped me. But also I remember the drive from the airport to Makkah, and I remember the road split at one point, and it was one road for Muslims and one road for non-Muslims. And if we had that in Britain, or if we had that in Canada, there would be, complete outcry. But it's okay because it's Muslims doing it. So when Muslims do it, it's completely acceptable. Bigotry is only acceptable when it comes from Muslims.
Yeah, I mean, again, like that's going back to what I said, like the benevolent bigotry. And I mean, it's something I said flippantly a while ago, or I wrote flippantly, and it was just, they can't see the victims for the brown people. They're so focused on being not racist that they don't want to call out anything because, it's a Shia killing Sunni or Sunni killing Shia. Who do you like, oh my God, if I call one person out, I'm calling out a brown person, so I can't do it. And it's just, again, this goes back to, Islam is a race, right?
Yeah.
It's...
So whenever we talk about, a white pedophile, does that mean that we're saying that every white person is a pedophile? Whenever we're talking about rape, does that mean that we're suggesting that every man is a rapist? It's fucking ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. When we're talking about parliamentarians that have, screwed around their expenses, are we saying that every MP is a fraud? Which actually I would probably say.
Yeah, I think that goes. Yeah, it kind of goes hand in hand with politics. Okay, that's one thing I'll say about like places like India and Pakistan. I say it's a more honest form of corruption because everyone knows it's there, everyone knows it's going on, and
Absolutely. I hand on heart completely. I've said this before as well. At least you know, hands down, that it's happening. They're unashamed in their corruption. Whereas here, they try and hide it badly. We all know that they're corrupt. If you've decided to go into politics, you've probably got something that you're hiding, right? That's fantastic. Yeah.
No, but I mean, this whole racism thing and this. Just, okay, we can't do it because they're brown, or we can't do it. I mean, I honestly find that so condescending, and I find that far more bigoted and harder to deal with than someone calling me a packy or a raghead or anything like that. Like that is easy to deal with. I know what that is, but this attitude that, oh, we have to go fix your problems. That not only do we have to go fix your problems, you were too stupid, and we were the ones that caused your problem. So, that's why it's just like, no, like I mentioned, like, the Shia Sunni thing. There was this case in Pakistan a couple of years ago where Sunnis attacked a Shia wedding. Then when the people went to the hospital, they waited at the hospital, and a guy blew himself up there as the ambulance was coming in with the victims. And, this has nothing to do with Western foreign policy. This has nothing to do with American foreign policy or UK. This is sectarian violence that has been going on for 1,400 years. Yeah, but, exactly. You're still racist if you call it out. And I don't get it.
But the thing is, right, so I get asked this when I deliver professional training around harmful traditional practices. Somebody says to me every single time, but what about, allegations of racism, allegations of bigotry? And I have to remind them, I get those accusations. It doesn't matter what colour you are. When they're shitting themselves, that they're about to get busted for being the disgusting perverts or bigots or, homophobes that they are, they will play victim and use the easiest trope that they can. For white people, it's racism. For us, it's Islamophobes. The thing is, you have to just make a decision. You make a decision. Are you going to stand up to it? Or are you just going to cower away and give up? Because if you're going to cower away and give up, fair enough, I respect that. But if you're going to stand in between and try and, be manipulative and say nothing to do with Islam, nothing to do, they're all victims. Just today, a dickhead journalist, Owen Jones, who's a proper bellend, wrote an article about these protests outside this Birmingham school saying, poor victim Muslims, nothing really to do with Islam. Islam isn't a homophobic religion. Well, how much of the Quran and the Hadith have you read, mate? Why don't you talk about the actual contents of these books? Because that's all we're focusing on. And these bigoted parents, they've jumped from excuse to excuse. First, they didn't want their kids being taught about it, simple as. Then it was that their kids were too young. Then it was because they weren't consulted, which they were. They just lied about it. And this is something new that started happening, by the way. Like, I've been involved in a few debates now where the Muslim person that I'm debating is just outright lying. I was debating an Ahmadi fundamentalist the other day, which I support them because I understand the persecution that they're facing in Pakistan, but this guy was just out and out lying. No, Islam isn't misogynistic, Islam isn't homophobic. What problem do you have with Islamic homophobia? Why is that a problem? And then, like, I was debating a hijabi woman about the hijab in Iran, and again, same thing. These women are completely liberated. There's no woman that's persecuted. There's no woman that's imprisoned. You're lying. Like, are you for real?
Yeah,
is this actually real?
I mean, and then there was all the news stories and reporting about the what's her name, Nasreen. I can't remember her last name. The lawyer, she just got in prison for 38 years and 148 lashes. I mean,
exactly.
It just wouldn't. I don't understand it, but I'm just going to go off on a little bit of a tangent because I just thought it was really funny. When you called Owen Jones a bellend, I used to work with. I did a lot of work with the military, and I was working with some British military. It was in Afghanistan, and this was the term bellend kept coming up. Now, I caught the gist of, like, they meant that the person was. I thought they were being stupid or something, but I'd never heard that slang before, and I asked, and everyone did what you just did. They started laughing, and then like they explain it, and it was just like, oh, so that's what you mean. Sorry, when you said bellend, it just made me laugh.
I know, it's fantastic. I guess it's like we're so used to going off on these tirades that I don't necessarily think that our language isn't universal, particularly some of our slang isn't universal. I'll make it easier for your listeners. He's a dick.
Yeah, but yeah, no.
The evidence is right in front of him, and he's looking at the evidence and going, "That's not true." And this is what we're finding time and again. That's what we're up against now. People looking at facts and evidence and saying, that's not true. I can't see that.
Okay.
I've never known this kind of fucking stupidity. Just absolute stupidity. Like, I don't know what to do with it anymore.
Well, okay, I've been speaking out about, like this whole identity politics thing where I understand identity matters, like, to an extent that, okay, I'm talking about my personal story, and this is why my identity and this matters, and this is how I can relate to whatever's happening. But to base politics and policy based on identity, or who you're going to support based on identity, as opposed to values, I really get wrong. But I think it was right after the Christchurch thing, and I saw all, and I shouldn't say it like the Christchurch thing, like the terrorist attack that happened in Christchurch. I don't want to be callous about it. It was horrible. But right afterwards, friends of mine who would put up these things that, it's all the fault of whiteness. Not that it was the fault of a white supremacist or people who are white supremacists. Forget the whole thing about, people who speak out about Islam were to blame for it. But like, it was all the fault of white people. And these were white people putting up these things. One was a pyramid saying at the bottom is whiteness. And then if it builds up to white supremacy, and whiteness will lead to white supremacy. And then there was another one that was like a paragraph long saying the same kind of BS. And I'm like, okay.
So we had members of ours that were contacted, and CEMB was contacted saying, are you happy now? As if we had instigated this. Something else that I saw post the Christchurch attack, and it was a horrific attack, of course. You'd have to be like an actual callous monster not to give a shit about what happened there, and never have we advocated any violence against anybody, even that we disagree with. And I disagree with a lot of people. Doesn't mean I want them dead. There is a difference, though. For me personally, there's a lot of people that say, just because you disagree with someone doesn't mean you hate them. I think that it's really easy to hate somebody that you disagree with. Doesn't mean that I want them dead. Doesn't mean that I want any harm to come to them. That's a major difference. I differentiate between that, because I think it's really easy when you start having disagreements with somebody to think, oh, I could never see your fucking face again and I would be really, really happy. But that doesn't mean that you want any harm coming to them. So that's really, really important. But there was a lot of people that got in touch with us and said, are you happy now? We would never, why would we be happy about that? But I also saw, so there's a few things that happened after the Christchurch attack. I saw a post on Facebook done by a Muslim man who saw that 300 Muslim people had converted after the Christchurch attacks to Islam. Now, he said, his post said, this is fantastic. We should have more attacks on innocent Muslims to create more Muslims. We lost 50, we gained 300. It was a benefit of 250. Somebody posted that.
Oh my God. Like, that's...
Exactly. And also, these very same people that are saying that whiteness is a problem will also be the same motherfuckers that turn around and say every time there's an attack, a terrorist attack at the hands of some Muslim fundamentalist, they will be the very same bastards to say this has got nothing to do with Islam, it's got nothing to do with Muslims, when it's got everything to do with Islam. Jihad is a fundamental tenet of Islam.
But that's why I brought up the whiteness thing, is because that's when, like, for a while there, I was thinking about, and I spoke to a couple of people about this, and I said, okay, how Sam Harris had done the concentric circles about Islam, like jihad, and then the groups like CARE or ISNA, like the Muslim Brotherhood, those type of groups. I said, okay, and I started talking about doing that. Okay, we'll take white supremacy and take white people, but it struck me that if you're thinking that this is a fault of all of whiteness, and you're putting that, like, I knew that people would use identity before, but it's like, okay, you're never going to understand that I'm only talking about an ideology. If you can't understand that I'm talking about if I'm talking about a white supremacist that does something, that I don't mean all white people, and you're automatically including all white people. There's no way I can tell you that I'm only talking about the pernicious ideology within the text of the religion, not the people themselves. Like, I don't want my family hurt. I don't want anything to happen to my mom. I don't want anything to happen to my sister, or my nephew, my brother-in-law. Like or even innocent people I don't know. I don't want anything to happen to anyone innocent.
Exactly. And it's important to be able to say, I dislike you, but I don't want any harm to come to you. Why by talking about the ideas or falling out with somebody? I've had friends that I've fallen out with before. Doesn't mean I want them to want them to die or want them to be killed. Quite happily never see them again. But that's very, very different to wanting harm to come to them. And I think it's a really, really offensive thing to say to somebody, that because you disagree with their ideas or disagree with them or dislike them for that matter, that you want harm to come to them. I think that's deeply, deeply offensive. But also with those concentric circles about that Sam Harris did, actually my bar for fundamentalist Muslims is very, very low. I think some people are quite happy to have discussions about homosexuality, whether it's a sin, whether it's acceptable, and all that kind of things. For me, on a very personal level, I think if you have a lower bar for women and homosexuals than you do for yourself as a practicing Muslim, then instantly that puts you in the category of fundamentalist Muslim, because then what you're saying is some people are less than me. If you're not championing equality as a Muslim, then you instantly are thrown into the category of fundamentalist Muslim. That's why that category was so broad, because it's holding some people to a much, much lesser standard. And I don't think Sam Harris, said made it that kind of broad, but for me it is. Instantly, the moment somebody says that homosexuals don't have a right, or even the fact that they think it's a choice, I think that's quite a blinkered view.
Okay, like something like that, I think we can. There are gray areas, and you can say, okay, what I consider fundamentalist, you don't. We both consider it wrong, but I might consider that person a conservative, where you consider them a fundamentalist. I mean, like I said, and again, when he talked about it, it was a couple of minutes. That was famously when Ben Affleck called him, gross and racist, and so yeah. But I mean, it was a. He didn't go into it in too much detail, so I don't think he. But again, we can talk about that, and I agree with you. If you're saying that by the dint of someone being, a woman, or someone being part of the LGBTQ community, that they're lesser than you, yeah, I would agree that that's a fundamentalist view, and that's a very literal interpretation. And there is absolutely, I would say, there's not much humanity in that view either. So it's
yeah.
I have no problem with that, and not a defense of Sam Harris or anything, but like I said, I don't think he went into it in that much detail. But but like I said, if we differed on that, and I said, okay, well, that's a conservative person, that's not really a fundamentalist. A fundamentalist would be someone who wants to put in policy that affects that, or a conservative might just think that. I mean, like I said, you could. Yeah.
Islamists. Yeah. The difference is Islamists want to do that. So Islamists want to affect politics and policy. Fundamentalists aren't as they're not necessarily involved in the political shaping politics and policy and stuff, and that's something that is happening right now. We actually do have Islamists making policies and political suggestions in the UK right now. For example, we've had there's an all-party parliamentary group for British Muslims that have just suggested a definition of Islamophobia that's monstrous. They've said that you're not allowed to say things like Islam was spread by the sword, which is just fact. They're saying that you can't talk about the fact that Muhammad was a paedophile, which is just fact. So there's lots of things that they're trying to deny us the right to speak about. They're saying on the one hand that they will allow free speech, but I read the whole document. It was like 70 something pages, but if you don't have the time to read the whole document, all you have to do is read the last few pages, the conclusion, and that will show you that actually, although they throughout the document lie that they're not planning on preventing free speech, that's exactly what the conclusion says it will do, because you're not allowed to state fact You know, that,
I read that document, and
yeah,
I heard about it, and I said, okay, I got to read this. I was horrified. Um,
yeah,
there's a group in the United States, and I mean, luckily, what you have, like that document and what's going on in the United States, doesn't really affect me. We have, because I'm in Canada, but we have some of our own issues here with things similar to that. But yeah, the CARE in the United States wants to do the same thing. So the CARE is the Council of American Islamic Relations. Um, they're a front for the Muslim Brotherhood and for Hamas. But anyway,
yeah,
they want to put that in like where, saying Islamic terrorism or Islamic jihad is then Islamophobia, which is a term I cannot stand. Let's call
yeah.
it,
None of us.
yeah, it's just, it causes so much issues. And then there was a private members bill brought into the so Ottawa, the province just next to Quebec, where I live, is Ontario, I should say, not Ottawa. They brought in a private members bill, where the same thing, they want, if you say Islamic terrorism or Islamic jihad, you're an Islamophobe, and
Which is
it's,
ridiculous.
yeah, I mean, I'm an absolutist when it comes to free speech. I think the limit should be what they have in the United States.
Yeah,
Which is
I
like,
think I agree. Actually, I didn't used to, but I do think I agree. Because I had this discussion with a friend recently. I it used to kind of make me feel a bit uncomfortable, the idea of not being able to openly make really, really bigoted statements. But I think, and Rushdie said this in an interview recently, that it's essential, because otherwise those ideas go underground, and then the movements that swell out of those underground hostilities that exist within your communities are far more dangerous than just the initial statements and views that those individuals have. So I think, yeah, I think I agree with you in terms of that bar. I think that's what we need internationally, really.
yeah. I mean, I also like my take on it too is that if you use the stifle the speech. So I go, like, if we're, like with Islam, you go back to 9/11 is, and I put that is a huge dividing point on like how all this talk changed. And I think one of the unintended consequences of 9/11 was the rise of the narrative. So you had, everyone started talking about, the narrative around this, the narrative around that, and maybe it was correlated and one had nothing to do with the other, but it just seems that after 9/11 we kept hearing this talk of narrative, which I'm beginning to hate that word. Like all this political correctness is beginning to make me hate language. I mean, narrative was a perfectly good word. Now it's got some underhanded connotation to it. But it's.
I agree, and that I feel like that as well. There's I've got a list of words now, believe it or not. And I was thinking about this morning. I've got a list of words that I can't tolerate anymore. Respect, offense, privilege.
Oh God. Problematic.
Problematic. I was just gonna say that. Oh my God, I hate it, and I can't help it. Have you heard that song? There's Richard Dawkins posted a song on the internet a few years ago, and there was controversy about it. It was a Big Red and like some Islamists doing like a song on a piano. I just hear that song playing in my head every time I hear the word problematic. But you're right. Like, they're taking language away from us. This is, and I don't know where we are now.
Yeah, I mean, like, how can you talk about things? And that's that. Okay, the stifling of the speech. One part of it, though. Okay, these things going underground. I'm not going to disagree with that, but it's also, and a lot of people brought this up, like when people started talking about Islam right after 9/11.
Yeah.
A few people brought up, if you keep shutting down people like yourself or Mariam Namazi, again, someone I respect greatly, or Yasmin, or anyone who's trying to talk reasonably about this, you leave that space for the bad actors. and
Of
I'm
course.
and I'm sick and tired of it. And okay, I'm not a huge voice, and but I'm not gonna let the bad actors take this space, because
Mm.
you're gonna have people on one end like Owen Jones, and you're gonna have people on the other end like Anjem Chowdhury, and
Yeah.
nothing's gonna get solved by those people. They're both doing things wrongly as far as I'm concerned, and for different reasons, but they're just the effect's the same. It's shutting down speech, and people are getting hurt and killed, and nothing's being done.
Yeah. Yeah. And the problem is that there's people in between, right? So like, I hate going to places where everybody agrees with me. I think it's a waste of time. Nothing is achieved from sitting and talking with people that just are going to nod along like idiots to everything you say, with the greatest of respect to those people, because obviously they're decent human beings. But the I like to talk to people who have a difference of opinion. I like to argue with them, because that's what changed my mind. Listening to those arguments, and really, like, there were things that I was hearing when I was a believer. There were things that I was hearing and thinking, that makes me feel so uncomfortable. Why does it make me feel uncomfortable? Because it's true.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the very first things I heard from CEMB, and like, I'd been an atheist for quite some time at that point, but I didn't know that I was an atheist, because it's not something that's not even a term that's used in our households, really. Is in a Pakistani household, you're never going to hear things like that. I just knew that I didn't believe in God, and that was the very first statement that I made as a 15-year-old to my mum. But I remember hearing from the Council of Ex-Muslims, ex-Muslims have done everything a lot of the time. They've shagged, they've taken drugs, they've drank, they've done everything. There's this one difficult point that they get stuck at, which is pork.
Yeah.
I thought, shit, that's true. Which made me then go out and try a bacon butty, and I genuinely thought I was going to die. It took me 2 years to do it. I went out and tried like, butty is a word for a sandwich in the UK. So it's like proper English slang. So I went out and tried a bacon sandwich, and I remember when I went to sleep, I thought I was going to die.
Okay.
I actually genuinely thought the sky, the ground was going to open up, and like thunder was going to come down on me. I was so scared. Nothing happened.
Okay, I'm a carnivore. I love meat, so I never had that problem whatsoever. Like, even before I even admitted to myself that I don't believe in this stuff, I was all in it, except for, and even to this day, bacon. Because I don't know if your parents ever ate it, but my parents used to eat this thing called bumblemachi, which was like a dried salted eel.
Oh,
And
right.
the smell of that cooking, and I tried it as a kid, and I just spat it out right away. The smell of that cooking reminds me of the smell of bacon, or bacon reminds me of the smell of that, and I just the smell of it makes me want to throw up. So I just no. But like everything else, like I was such a carnivore. My parents tell me this because I remember when we were still living in India. Apparently, at one point, I told them that we should keep an elephant in the backyard so that whenever we needed meat, we had an elephant to go cut some meat off, because I ate so much meat.
Oh, bless you. It's funny because like, I feel really sad for you, because bacon's one of my most favorite things. So I now don't eat a huge amount of meat, actually, but I do still love bacon. So is it normal bacon, or can you have smoky bacon? Does it make a difference?
No, it just reminds me of it, and it turns me off. Like it's. But that's the only thing. Like it's not because of any hang up or anything like that. It was just that smell and that taste. Just like, I remember going camping with friends, and we'd forget butter or something sometimes. So to cook the eggs, I'd have to wait until my friends cooked bacon in the pan, then I'd cook my eggs in that grease. And it was just, it was like fighting back to nausea, but I need to eat breakfast, and I'm camping, and I have to eat.
Brilliant. Oh dear.
Yeah, but I mean, but like these little things that, we're laughing at it, and it is but it sticks in the back of your head, because you're told, I mean, especially that, like, I remember we're constantly told, when we went shopping, go down to the corner store as little kids, like, 8 or 9 years old, and my parents would like pick up a loaf of bread, and I'd read the ingredients of the bread to make sure there was no lard in it.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
if you're buying a snack, you read that, and they're like, little kids shouldn't have to be that conscious of what snacks they're eating.
No,
Like,
exactly, exactly. So, like, I remember, I have a bit of a theory about the whole pork thing, by the way. So, with our young people, I think the reason why ex-Muslims can do everything bar eating pork, and I mean, I know some ex-Muslims that have been, non-believers for, 5, 6 years, but they still can't eat pork. I think it's because the brainwashing around pork starts. That's one of the very first things that starts, even before you can read the Quran, even before they can tell you about, like, sex and like adultery and fornication and beer and stuff like that, because that all comes later. You're not going to go to the pub for a pint at 5 years old, but
no.
you are likely to buy sweets as a 5-year-old that might have gelatin in them. So you're not, you're forced to be a bit more conscious about that from a much, much younger age. So I think because the brainwashing starts so early around that, it's a much, much harder one to combat for a lot of ex-Muslims. But I've got two nieces. They're beautiful, but my brother, his partner's white British. They're not married. They've been together for over a decade, and now they have two daughters. And a couple of years ago, not a couple of years ago, sorry, last year, I went to their birthday party, and I'd taken like a huge bag of sweets because it was their birthday, so they were staying up all night. And my mum was there. And the girls really took to this bag of marshmallows, and they'd eat one, go back to the table, pick up four, eat four, go back to the table, pick up more. So they were just absolutely like in love with them. When my mum came over to me and she was like, "At least don't give my daughters pork. Like, you don't have the right to do that." So I took the sweets into the kitchen and I told, my sister-in-law, I was like, "Look, so this is what my mum's just said." And she took the sweets out of my hands and she said to my mum, "It's their birthday. They're going to eat whatever the hell they want to eat." But it wouldn't have been so easy for me to do that to my mum.
Yeah.
It was my kid,
Okay, but this gelatin thing. Okay, like I remember growing up, and when we moved to Montreal, there was only one mosque, and up until the later '80s, before they started getting more than just a couple. But we'd hear these things. Oh, so and so said you can't eat cheese because it's got rennet in it. And then I'm like, who makes up these rules? Like, I remember I lived in Vancouver for a while, and I just moved there. And I mean, normally if I'm going buying, I just go to the local supermarket, buy whatever meat. But if I'm cooking Indian food, I like buying halal meat. I just think it tastes better in the food. Maybe it's just growing up, whatever. Like it's a psychological thing. I don't know. But I went to this halal meat shop. And I also do like calf's brains and things like I love that kind of stuff. So I asked the guy, and I was speaking Urdu with the guy, and I said, do you have can I get? And he tells me that no, the calf's brain is not like you can't get brain because it's not halal. It can never be halal because the brain sits in blood. And then,
Right.
And then I called up my dad, and I was like, because he's the one at home who would go to the halal butcher shop. I said, "Can you get brain, calf's brains?" He's like, "Yeah." I said, "Well, the people here told me this." And he goes, "Where did they get that from?" So it's just like arbitrary rules that someone just decides. I have no idea how this is thought up. Like,
Exactly, but this is it, right? Nobody knows which is the right school of thought within Islam. Everybody has their own interpretations, and I guess that's a good reason to doubt, really. If you can't if you can't make an idea easy for every follower of yours to believe, you can't make it truly universal, then to me it has no credibility. To say that Islam is a universal religion, for me, that instantly, it's so easy to debunk that, because why have it in Arabic? Why have it in classical Arabic? Why have it so that only a small proportion of people can understand it? Why have so many sects within it? I've got a friend who wonderfully says, I hated more Muslims when I was a Muslim than I do now as an ex-Muslim.
but that's true though. I mean, okay, I worked in Bosnia for a while, and a lot of the Bosnian Muslims, and Bosnian Muslims, at least back when I was there, I think there might be a little bit more of getting a little bit more hard line, but they were, aside from the pork thing, they weren't really practicing. I mean, they would go to mosque and stuff, but a lot of the ones that I spoke with, I'd say about 50% were resentful for the fact that they couldn't practice their faith without having to learn to at least read another language, let alone
Yeah.
understand it. They were very resentful of that. And
Yeah.
like I said, how can you say that's universal? And it's just, but I use that to my advantage, because when I have been told that, oh, well, you never spoke Arabic, so you didn't understand the Quran, so you weren't really a true Muslim, and so that's why you left. I turn it around on my family when they tell me that. It's because I'm like, well, you guys don't speak Arabic, so are you not true Muslims because you don't understand it well enough? If I didn't understand it well enough to have left, you don't understand it well enough to believe.
Exactly. But also, like, so this is something that gets thrown at us quite a lot. So I've read the Quran in English, like, 4 or 5 times now. Um, and now I've read it more often since leaving Islam than when I was a Muslim. I read it in Arabic lots of time when I was a Muslim. But what is the purpose of reading a book in a language you don't understand several times again and again? I actually feel quite resentful about it now, because I mean, I've got a library in my house, and there's so many books. I've got more books than I've read, to my shame. But I also feel angry at the fact that I was made to read the same book over and over again when I could have studied a whole, an entire body of literature in the time that was spent wasted reading the same book over and over again, doing the same crappy prayer again and again. This mundane repetitiveness that comes with Islam is so unbelievably boring. And I just thought of something, actually, going back to some of the racism stuff that we were talking about earlier. I don't know if you followed. Did you see any of what was happening with Sinead O'Connor in the UK?
Oh yeah, I mean, okay, I saw a little bit of it. She said she converted to Islam, then she made a couple of things, but she was rambling and incoherent, and I just,
Yeah,
I was,
this is one of my problems, right? So Islam and all religions actually do this, I have to say. So I worked in a psychiatric unit a few years ago, um, and they had a chaplain. Now, when people are that desperate, they're looking for something, anything that desperately that will help them, and they think that religion is going to help them, but it obviously doesn't. Sinead O'Connor, months before she converted to Islam, had sent out a video, like uploaded a video where you could see she was so desperately unwell. She was crying at the camera, saying that everybody that loves me isn't here right now. And living with mental health is very, very hard. But within that time frame, between her first video where she was very, very distressed and her video where she'd, converted to Islam, something had happened. I feel like there was some exploitation of her vulnerability and to bring her into Islam. And this is something that Islam does very, very well. If you're lonely, you're alone, you have nobody, Islam is going to give you a community, but it's not a real community because it's a conditional community. You're not accepted as you are. You have to do certain things. You have to, believe certain things. So you're not gifted a community unconditionally. And then after converting, she says quite openly, "I hate all white people."
yeah, but that's just it. Like, okay, I mean, this is the opposite of what I'm about to say, but I like, again, I've been joking around just because, like I said, the language and everything, and I started calling it the transracializing effect of problematic comments. So if you're a person of color and you don't think right or you don't speak right, all of a sudden you can become white and you're fair game. So, like, someone like you or myself, we speak out against Islam, and oh my God, you're homophobes, you're racist, you're bigots, and it's like, wait a minute, how? And this is white people, or that term like native informant or house Muslim, and and they'll call you a racist house Muslim, unironically, without realizing how racist that comment is. But oh no, you said something wrong, so you're not really a person of color anymore. You're white. And in her case, she somehow gained some brownness. I don't understand.
Exactly. But this is it, right? Nobody, not one single person questioned where she got that statement from. Because you have to bear in mind that she was a very, very, very sick woman. She would have had to have heard that from somebody to repeat that kind of shit. So my concern was that nobody picked that up. Nobody picked up the racism that she had learnt very quickly from this conversion that she had undergone. Nobody said anything about it. That was very, very worrying to me.
Yeah, okay, what you were saying there about that, like I was thinking about this, and I was speaking to a couple of people about this. Like in the '80s, especially in the U.S., like when all the gangs, the gang warfare was happening, uh, they were, you know, how like these gangs would go into high schools and find the loners, or white supremacists would be doing that as well. They would find the loners, the people who were alienated, and they would prey on them, and they would prey on that. They would use that fact to get
Yeah.
them to join the groups. And I was like, okay, you hear about it from the, like things like the mosques, and from community centers, and they do the same thing. Like they find the ones who are vulnerable and they're weak, and then parents bringing their kids to a Sunday school at a mosque. You
Mm,
know, they're basically handing them to the wolves. If it is a mosque that is, which quite a lot of them are, unfortunately, funded by Saudi,
yep.
teaching this very strict Salafi interpretation, right, is just like you are picking on the weak, and you're just handing the weak. So someone like Sinead O'Connor, or someone in that state of mind,
Yeah.
is very easy prey to. I mean, it could have been like a. I don't think you really have that many fundamentalist Christians in the UK, but it could have been something like that. It could have been a. I don't think she would have gone in the route of a white supremacist, but let's just say it was something like that. But like, you know what I mean? Like, it could have been anything where they prey on someone who's weak and vulnerable, and that's.
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of the Christian fundamentalists, we do have some, but they're not as powerful as the Muslim fundamentalists. So the Birmingham school with the LGBT issue, um, actually it started with Christian fundamentalists initially, but they were much, much fewer in numbers. They managed to, the teacher that was that had created this program, he was in another school, and he was forced to leave by the Christian fundamentalist parents, but they didn't manage to galvanize mobs in the same way as the Muslim fundamentalists did. When the Muslim fundamentalists took up this issue in the next school, the Christian fundamentalists then piggybacked off that movement. Then we also saw Jewish fundamentalists piggybacking off that movement, and far right fundamentalists piggybacking off that movement. It was interesting because we could see all of this playing out on our social media when we first started picking up the case. We noticed the kind of the weird voices that were joining forces with this. We actually also had, rather disturbingly, some feminist voices that were saying this is good because we don't want kids being taught about the trans issue. Now, I mean, I have quite strong views about the trans issue, but I also don't think that it's a problem teaching kids about equality.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that, okay, the whole this whole protest, especially in Birmingham, like we had something similar in Ontario, quite a few years ago, and it was the same thing. It was Christian and Muslim fundamentalist groups getting together to stop sex education for kids because they didn't like what was being taught. But I mean, one of the worst parts I found about what was going on in Birmingham, though, was, like, first it was like, why are you promoting this and this, that? But at one point it came down to the fact that they didn't even want their kids to know that, the LGBT community existed.
Yeah,
It was
exactly.
just, wiping out of people, and it was just like,
One parent has been reported just saying that if my child is gay, I will kill them.
yeah, I mean, I don't understand that. Like, at one point, you'll have, like, I mean, you're from Pakistan, I'm from India. I'll cut off
Yeah.
my right arm for you. I'll do this. Like
Yeah, yeah.
but and then right away. But if you don't do this, I'll kill you. And it's like,
Yeah.
wait a minute. Like like you said, it's not unconditional. It's not. There's always something attached to it, and it's almost like it's bribery.
Yes,
It's
it
just,
is.
and it's depressing.
Which is
Uh,
hugely abusive. it's hugely abusive. If everything that you do, if your love and compassion and solidarity comes with conditions attached, then it's not really solidarity at all. And the backlash that a lot of the people supporting this program have received has really shown the homophobia that still exists within this country. I mean, there have been law changes. When I first got into the mental health sector, they told me about how it wasn't that long ago that they were sectioning, chemically castrating, homosexuals in this country. So we made progress, but then we regressed once again.
I don't understand that. I was like, up until about the late 90s, early 2000s, it seems like things were getting better and better. Yes. And we were coming close together, and all of a sudden everything became about identity. Everything became about there is no more talking about like a common humanity or groups getting together. It's all about, well, if you're not a Muslim woman, don't speak about the hijab. If you're not a black person, don't speak about what's going on to the black community. It's like, why? Why can't, if I see an injustice, why can't I speak out about what I think is an injustice? And if I'm wrong, talk to me, correct me. If you think I'm wrong saying that the hijab is misogynistic, explain to me why I'm wrong. Don't just call me, an Islamophobe or whatever, and just, and then just walk away. Educate me why I'm wrong then.
But the problem is what we've created in Britain, and I'm pretty certain in the US as well, and in Canada, I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is we've created a creche-like environment for anyone over the age of 18. So rather than, challenging young people that are going off to university and college about their views, we've created an environment where we're just tolerating their kind of outbursts when they think that their feelings are hurt. When I made outrageous statements at university, my lecturer shouted me down and said, "Get the evidence or fuck the fuck off." I'm really grateful for that, because then what I did, the Sadia that went to university in the beginning and the Sadia that left the university were two very different women. I left university thinking I can't just make outrageous assertions without evidence because I come across as a dickhead, which actually nowadays university students are leaving university thinking that their feelings are more important than facts. That they can shout down facts if their feelings are hurt or they're uncomfortable. And the whole purpose of university is to create a safe, uncomfortable environment where you can challenge young people. And if they don't like it, in the safety of that university, they can then say, hang on a minute, let's talk about this, let's unpack this, let's critique this, and they can develop their critical faculties. But if they're not being able to do that in a university, then actually they're not going to be very well prepared for the big wide world that is supposed to be difficult for them.
Yeah, the universities here are getting worse. And it's the same thing's happening here. But I mean, it's like, the whole feeling things and all that, but it's like you're not prepared, like you're completely not preparing them for it. But unfortunately, that unpreparedness is now seeping into, like, I work for a government, and and I know other public institutions were starting to do this, where they're bringing in this diversity training, they're bringing in this kind of stuff, and it's all very subjective. It's all how it makes people feel, and you have to think about how your actions will make people feel. I'll give you an example. We were upgrading some of the communities to get fiber optic, and this is going off topic, and we were putting fiber optic into the homes in the communities because the internet service up in northern Canada is horrible. I manage, like, in the area where I lived in, I managed the internet service provider that the government ran, so I know that it's not the greatest service. My argument was, okay, we're going to have to put these modems in the homes because, if something goes wrong and we need someone to turn it on or off, it has to be accessible to the end customer. And the reasoning I got was, that these modems are expensive, and a lot of the people might just break them because, people get drunk up here a lot, which is not untrue that there is a huge alcohol problem in a lot of those communities.
Yeah.
So because of that, people might get drunk and break the modems, and the modems are expensive. Let's leave them locked away in the furnace room. And I said, well, if something goes wrong, I have to send someone there to fix it. Whereas if it's in the house and the person can do a little bit of stuff like, okay, unplug this, plug this cable in here, just very basic things, right? I'm not asking anything terribly technical.
No.
But now I have to send someone to fix a very simple problem because they want to treat people like children. And it's what I'm seeing coming out of universities. It's you still want to keep the infancy of these kids going, and they're not kids, they're in their 20s. They should be prepared for life. And, they don't, there is no struggle. Like everything is, I heard, I don't know if you ever watch any of his stuff, or Joe Rogan, I hear him use this term a lot. It's like, you're nerfing the world.
Yes.
And that's exactly what it is. I mean, it's, there's no, like I see it with my nephew, smart kid, really bright. But I mean, and part of this is the state. Like if my sister had let him go to the park right across the street when he was 10, Child Protection Services could have taken him away because, you're not watching your kid.
Wow.
And it's like, okay, he's across the street in a park. It's not like, she's letting him go downtown by himself. Even though, I used to take a bus into downtown Montreal, bus and subway when I was 8 years old.
Yeah.
This
infantilizing of society has led to society rotting a little bit, really. Like you have to be able to be, people have to, and individuals have to be challenged to learn. We didn't learn from being wrapped up in cotton wool. I think what's ended up happening, and the thing is, I think where this has been allowed to happen at universities, those university students have to go out into the big wide world, and they have to get jobs, they have to be able to engage in adult life, and then they're taking those ideas that they're learning of the fact that they can kick off at university and get their way. They're taking that kind of behaviour into the workplace, which is rotting society. I spoke to a poor university student yesterday, lovely guy. His partner's ex-Muslim, he's white British, but he's also autistic, so he processes information, then he asks just basic straightforward questions. He's doing sociology, and the humanities is one of the worst places where rot is occurring. And he said to me, so his lecturer, who's Muslim, had said, he's talking about Islam and talking about Muslims and talking about racism and likening Islam to a race. And he just quite innocently said, well, excuse me, sorry, this isn't, Muslims aren't a race. That was all his statement was. He got full on attacked. Somebody called him a cunt. Somebody threatened him, said, come outside, we'll deal with this outside. And the lecturer stood by. In fact, he was saying that the lecturer was actively encouraging this person to take him outside and kick his head in. This and the fact that university lecturers are now acting like this, and I've dealt with a lot of lecturers as well, that they're behaving like infants too, realistically, actually. But I think there's been an intentional move towards this because they are, they're promoting this kind of infantilization of mainstream society, and we're much easier to deal with if we're all behaving like idiotic fucking kids.
But I mean, all this stuff. I worked overseas for close to 13 years, and I was in war zones and disaster areas. I came back to Canada in 2014, so I left before social media. There was instant message, there was MSN Messenger and stuff like that, but there wasn't really social media. I came back in 2014. I saw this insanity, and I mean, I was in active war zone, so even when Facebook and Twitter and all that were becoming more ubiquitous, we weren't allowed them on the basis just because of you can give out information really easily, right?
Yeah, of course.
But I come back and I see this, and especially this shut up, you're racist, don't talk about this, things you couldn't talk about. I mean, the first thing that popped in my head was these are blasphemy laws. Like, why are we creating new blasphemy laws? and recently there was a guy who wrote this. Well, there's one British person and two American people did these studies. They did a bunch of papers
Yeah.
that got published in like feminist studies and race studies and whatever. But one of the guys who was involved in that, James Lindsay, he wrote this
Mm.
article, and it's a long article. It's 15 to 20,000 words on
Yeah.
the religion of social justice. And when he talks social justice, he's not talking like the Martin Luther King, right? Which
Yeah.
that is a
Right.
social justice I can get behind. But he's talking
Yeah.
like this new perverted form of social justice where it's all based on identity, it's all based on grievance, it's all based on oppression, right?
Yeah.
And he points out the similarities where it's similar to religion. Like it's got the epistemology behind it.
Yeah.
He talks about whiteness as being akin to original sin. And I
Yeah.
mean, he actually has written a couple of books on religion, and he studied the psychology of religion. So it was an interesting piece, and that's like I've been over the last few years, like because when I came back, I was never outspoken about anything really. I believed in certain
Yeah.
values. I was always a free speech fundamentalist, but I just started speaking out about it, and then I got
Yeah.
started being a little bit more vocal about the ex-Muslim thing. But
Yeah.
it's all the same fight.
Yeah.
It's
Of course.
obviously like in Islam, the direction of the hatred and the direction of what's banned, what's allowed is it's different than what's done with a white supremacist. Let's just say, but
Yeah.
like it's come to the point where I think you know. And I'm obviously what you do is very important. What Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain does is very important. And I'm not saying you guys should stop, but I'm just saying I think it's time for everyone to coalesce together and say, okay, you know what? There's authoritarianism and there's liberalism. Let's sort out
Who's
what's
who?
what, and then
Yeah.
we can attack the authoritarianism. And when I say attack, I mean obviously like counter against it. I'm not talking about full on violence or anything, but
Yeah.
because it's so many different shades of the exact same thing,
Yeah.
and it's time I think it's time we started like okay,
And
let's attack what needs to be attacked. Sorry, go ahead.
it's really interesting. So, I mean, like, before I go on, actually, I really like this term free speech fundamentalist. I think I'm going to steal that from you if you don't mind. That's fantastic.
I stole that from I think I stole that from Ayaan Hirsi Ali. So go ahead.
Oh, really? I like that a lot. I like that very much. So it's interesting. In terms of where we are today, so the right, and I'm not talking about the far right. I'm just talking about like the conservative right. Do want to keep us divided. It's in their it's in their interest. So in the UK, this started a very, very long time ago. In 1926, we had a general strike where everybody came out on strike, and in 10 days, this country was brought down to its knees, and they never ever wanted to see something like that again. And every single revolution around the world that ever happened, the French Revolution had the Brits quaking in their boots, like the British powers that be quaking in their boots. It's very, very frightening for the powers that be when people organise. So to ensure that that never happened ever again, there was lots of legislation brought in, things like the trade union legislation, to ensure that you couldn't have. So if one industry was striking, if another industry came out and did a sympathy strike alongside them, that sympathy striking community would be prosecuted with the heaviest of penalties. So that was one thing that happened. So they brought that in. The other thing they started doing was actively attacking communities, and we saw this, throughout after 1926 with every single strike action that happened. We saw this kind of attacking of those communities. So trade unions were attacked, community centres were attacked, children's centres were attacked, youth centres were attacked. Any place that could have been used as a free public space was attacked, even pubs. In this country, we used to have free public houses where people could come and have meetings and have a quick pint. Even that's not the case anymore. Like going for a pint, it costs you an arm and a leg, so people can't afford it anymore. So there was this constant attack against communities that were trying to organise, because obviously power in numbers, and they know that. Now, the interesting thing that's happening, though, is where the right had to make an effort, and I'm not talking about the far right. I'm just talking about the generic conservative right, where they had to put in effort to divide us and to keep us apart from each other. Now the left are doing that job for them. So the postmodernist and the kind of liberal left that we've been talking about that exists now, there's this regressive left, this tactic that they have of dividing people by their ethnicity and then their religion, then their sex, then their gender, every single dividing line that you can fucking think of, they are actually doing the job of the right wing, quite fantastically. That's why I believe postmodernism and this regressive left move have got so much power now, because there was a silent acceptance from the other side. And I'm not blaming the right for this, but I'm blaming the fucking idiots on the left. And I personally think as a left winger, if you are not talking about class, if you're not talking about inequality, if you're not talking about, if you're not doing the structural analysis that the left used to do, then you do not have a right to call yourself a left winger. If you're only focusing on identity, call yourself a right winger, because actually that's what the left used to do. There was this kind of tribalism that used to exist in the left. And if you're now behaving like that, then you're only a right winger. You're not a left winger. And I think it's really important to kick back against this modern left that we have now. And they are stronger than us, because actually our voices, this is the mainstream left narrative now. But we have to kick back against it, and it's going to be a horrible fight. And it pisses me off, if I'm honest. These young lefties, and some of them are a bit older, but this modern left, they're claiming that they're the most oppressed when they've had it the easiest they've ever had it. There's women's organizations in this country that have been going for 40, 50, 60 years that had to fight on every single level. They were fighting the racists and the bigots within their own community when they set up their domestic abuse services. So I'm talking about there's an organisation called Southall Black Sisters. It's fantastic, and they're still as radical as they were when they first started. They were fighting fundamentalism, religious fundamentalism. They were dealing with domestic abuse and sexual violence within our communities. They were dealing with accusations of fueling more racism, and they were dealing with the racists. They were dealing with misogyny. They were dealing with every single kind of backlash you could think of. They've had their heads kicked in. They've experienced actual, genuine bigotry. And the young people today, they haven't had that.
Yeah. Okay. About that, it's just half the stuff I say are right. I'm very snarky, and but I mean, I because you hear about cultural appropriation, but then a lot of the stuff you hear from white people, middle class, so-called liberal white people with this white guilt, and it's saying it's all the fault of white people and stuff like that, and how dare you speak out against group X, right? And I just started calling it victimization, like victim appropriation. Like you're appropriating someone else's victimhood. You're feeling aggrieved on the behalf of someone else who probably doesn't even feel aggrieved.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's ridiculous. I'm gonna thank you very much for your time, because it's been really generous, but I'm gonna have to get going. And if you had anything left to say, if you wanted to promote anything, I know you're working on a couple of things. If you want to talk about that, where can people get a hold of you?
So a couple of things. Just one last point before we do go. And it's been really, really, really nice talking to you. I can see we're both quite animated as well. Which is really positive. But the end to this cultural appropriation narrative, sorry to use the word that you hate, the problem with it is right now they're saying stick to your own, what's that horrible phrase that they've started using, or that horrible kind of, stay in your lane. That pisses me.
God.
So vile. So fucking vile. But the problem with this right now, it's, you stick to your own clothing, you stick to your own culture, you stick to your own food, you stick to your own music. Do you know where that ends up? What I see as the end destination to that is you stick to your own race. You do not have mixed marriages. You do not have mixed children. That's exactly what the far right in this instance want. The idea of somebody having a mixed marriage enrages the far right. And the idea of mixed race kids enrages the far right. To think that this is where this left could end up, and it is an absolute, and that's exactly where I see this ending up. It means that they need to check themselves right now, and put an end to this fucking idiocy that they have. So that's one thing that I kind of wanted to end on. But in terms of some of the stuff that we are doing, so the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain right now is fundraising. We've literally just started the fundraiser we've got various activities that we're doing in LGBT month. So we are going to be doing a panel discussion. We're going to be showing a film. We're going to be doing like an art exhibition, and we're hoping to take part in the Pride Parade again this year, which is, last year we really had to fight to be able to get back onto the parade. So we're in the process of doing all of that now, but our funds are dwindling, so we are hoping to fundraise. So if anybody can donate even a little bit, it really, really, really does make a difference. It means a huge amount. But follow our work and just get in touch if you need help with anything. I mean, we work with upwards from 500 people a month, every month, with various issues. So if you do need help and support, please do get in touch with us. You can just find us at the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain. If you Google that, our website is the first to come up. And I can be contacted via the website as well. All of our email addresses are on there. There's a contact number on there if you need help, advice, or support with anything at all. Please do get in touch. And thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
No problem. Thanks a lot for coming on. It was great talking to you, and I can see why you're a spokesman for CMB, because you're so well spoken. And thank you everyone for listening. Yeah, and then, no, thanks a lot. Just hang on one sec. So thanks everyone for listening, and I will be back again.